Now, our next session is going to whet your appetite for this afternoon's breakout workshops. It's Breakthrough Innovations and Europe's Strategic Objectives. We talked a little bit about, in the other sessions, about the need to be strategic, about to look at the aims and outcomes of breakthrough innovation rather than just innovation for innovation's sake. So we're going to look a little bit at the increasingly changing world we live in, the landscape against which we're hoping to see this breakthrough innovation. And to deliver us our keynote on that, followed by questions, I do hope you're all ready to ask him a few things, is Pierre-Alexandre Balland, Professor at Utrecht University and Artificial and Natural Intelligence Toulouse Institute. Please, take the floor.
Thank you, Jennifer. May I have my slides, please? And while we're waiting for the slides, bonjour à tous. Welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I already heard really interesting workshops that kind of relate a little bit to what I will be talking about. And essentially, I want to make key messages. I want to make a couple of important points about the importance of regions for innovation. So my background is I'm an academic. I'm also an entrepreneur. I work a lot in policy with a lot of colleagues from DGRTD who are here today. And I spent half of my career in the US and the other half in Europe. So I could see a little bit of different way to innovate and different way to actually leverage regional assets, regional ecosystems to actually achieve a higher level innovation. And one of my frustrations when I'm in Europe is that we have so much talent, so much research excellence that does not always translate into the innovation outcome that we should expect. And the problem is not at the individual level. A big problem is at the systemic level. So I hope that events like the one today can change a little bit things and make this system of innovation a little bit more efficient. So how can we leverage truly our regional ecosystem, the wealth, the talent and the capital of our regional ecosystem to achieve the level of innovation that we should expect in Europe to achieve actually EU global leadership? Because that should be an absolute obsession to achieve global leadership in this complex world. So, not supposed to be my slide here? Okay, this one, yes. All right, so first point, which is really important to understand, is that global innovation consumption is increasing. So we basically live in a world where the consumption of innovation happens at the global level. So if you look at this, these are the top 100 companies by market cap. And if you look at these companies, think about whether you use their products or not. So essentially think about Apple. Who has an iPhone? Raise your hand. Okay, quite a lot of people. I use Gmail. Do you also use Gmail? Right? So a big issue with knowledge consumption is that it's extremely global, and this globality is actually increasing. What does that mean? Is that it's getting easier and easier for these companies to reach literally everyone on the planet. That means this market for these technologies and innovation is completely global. We don't have these barriers that we had in the 70s, where we had transport cost barrier. In the digital economy, every customer can be reached extremely easily. Now, that contrasts enormously learning how to use this one. That contrasts enormously with the fact that innovation is increasingly local in terms of production. So if you look at this map here, this is a map, what we call a spiky map of patents in the US. And what you see is that you have a few very high spikes and basically this large valley where nothing happens. So something really important to understand is that innovation is incredibly concentrated. It's the most concentrated economic activity that is out there. So essentially, on one hand, you have a very global market, and on the other hand, the people that actually produce this innovation actually cluster in very, very few places. Something completely staggering. The top 5 cities in the world in terms of patenting outcome, one of them is Paris, that's nice, Osaka, Tokyo, San Francisco. Top 5 in the world, they produce 20% of all innovation, if you measure innovation with patents, which I think is a great indicator, by the way. So 20%, 5 cities. So you see how this world that we live in is shaped by very, very few people, very few companies, in very few places, but it shapes our life, the life of everyone. So you have this incredible tension. And by the way, if you think about digital technologies, for example, one of them being artificial intelligence, one thing that is very worrying and that creates this giant monopoly is the existence of network effects and reinforcing feedback loops. So one thing that happens is, imagine a company named Google having a slightly better, higher comparative advantage in making prediction to filter and rank websites. This very tiny comparative advantage at the beginning means you're going to get a little bit more customers. When you have more customers, basically you get more data. Once you have more data, the algorithm gets better, you offer a better product, and you iterate this loop enough, and you end up in a winner-takes-all world. So the world of today's innovation, the world of breakthrough technologies, is a winner-takes-all world, which means if we don't innovate at this level, at this global level in Europe, we're going to be consumers of technology. The only thing we can do is try to regulate these technologies, but we cannot embed the value we discuss about all the time into these technologies. So our absolute obsession should be to actually have this sovereignty and have this global leadership. That is something extremely important. We cannot be waiting on the sideline and basically be the referee between China and the US. We have to come together and understand that, not fight between each other, between having like a French digital strategy and a German digital strategy. This is not the level that matters. The level that matters is to team up and basically be extremely competitive at the global scale. Because one of the issues is that this self-reinforcing tension where innovation basically reaches more and more places, but at the same time is becoming like incredibly concentrated. Well, it means that we have to develop this strategy, because this EU-level strategy, because the catching up is really, really high once you miss the first iterations because of these feedback loops, and I could develop that a little bit more. One thing that I didn't mention here, and that's super important, because I talked about this map, and this spiky map, that tells you about this kind of winner-takes-all world, but the graph on the other side is very interesting. There is something on the x-axis that I call complexity. In the literature, we talk a lot about complexity, how complex specific knowledge is. And by the way, you want to be specialized in complex knowledge, because complex knowledge is something that everybody wants to do, but very few can. And therefore, you can have a much higher markup. Now, here I rank technologies in terms of complexity. So you see, for instance, computer hardware and software are like on the extreme right of the graph, so they are like very highly complex technologies. And on the y-axis, you have basically the concentration. The concentration of these technologies in a few places, in this case, mainly metropolitan area. And you have an almost, correlation of 1, so almost a perfect correlation between the level of complexity of these technologies and the level of concentration of these technologies. That means that a true innovation strategy, an innovation policy at the EU level has to take into account the geographical component. And you start to see some initiative going into that direction, trying to really understand that we have to focus on regions. Knowledge is in regions. It's not in nation states. It is in region. It's highly concentrated. And one of my goals, and what I really like, the reason why I really like to work also with DG R&I, is to try to really push this idea that we need to look at the geography of this innovation to actually make the system more efficient. Now, something really, really important. Country level, no. EU level. We have a lot of initiative at the country level. I'm part of the AI strategy of France. I work with the AI Institute in Toulouse, which is one of the 4 AI institutes in France for the AI strategy. But this is not enough. This is not enough and there is way too much resources at the national level. So you end up with a national strategy, a French AI strategy, a German AI strategy, an Hungarian AI strategy, a Spanish AI strategy, and that does not work. There is absolutely no way we can achieve the scale that we need at the EU level if we keep defining strategies at the national level. We have to find a way to team up and actually link regions and think about how to leverage knowledge in regions and link regions rather than thinking in terms of national level, which is, by the way, what you see in the US and what you see also in China. So like the two biggest players in these digital technologies, because if I come back to the first graph, like leading technology, leading companies by market cap, you see basically the US mainly and China rising really, really quick on the global landscape. And these two countries have very regionalized strategies, and they have strategy at the higher level. So my wish, looking forward, would be to have Europe really playing the role of a true leader and captain by basically telling us this is the cap, this is where we're going in terms of technologies. And that requires to prioritize, and that's a very hard question. It's a very hard political question, because we have limited resources, so we cannot invest in all technologies. I was listening to the report of the workshop this morning, and I heard something like 300,000 patents in ICT. There are actually 250,000 different technological categories. So experts define 250,000 different categories. One of them can be deep learning, one of them can be random forest, one of them can be mRNA. 250,000. Can you imagine the complexity of this technological landscape? And one of the really, really big responsibility for like an EU looking forward is to actually make this really hard choice to prioritize and say we invest massively in some technologies, which means by definition that there are technologies on which you're not going to invest a lot. So we have to define this very complex, breakthrough, high impact, transformative. Doesn't really matter how you put it, we can discuss about that. But the goal is to truly make this effort of prioritization. Just to give you an idea, China invests 9 billion in public investment in AI in 1 year. The US private investment in AI is about 25 billion, and that's just the direct investment. You have about 100 billion of indirect investment. When you have a technology, oh my goodness, like artificial intelligence, when you have one of these technologies that's basically span the entire economy, and the use cases span, the way we live in many different ways, we need a very strategic focus at the EU level on this technology. And we need massive investment. Like, we have these pillars in Horizon Europe. We need to have a little bit of these pillars for these key technologies. And that means making choices, hard choices to invest, but there is no way around it. There's no way around it. Otherwise, I really don't see how we're gonna not lag behind anymore. So that means making this hard choice. Now, you might ask, like, how to make this hard choice? So let's say we have a first step where we agree that regions are the driver, the powerhouse of innovation. Let's say we agree on that today. There is no discussion on that. We agree that we need to make this strategic choice. And again, it's something which is not trivial. It's very hard, because where do you invest? In which technologies do you put the money is already very hard. When you're going to decide, for instance, for Horizon Europe to put like 10 billion on AI, that is a tough, it's something tough to sell. So already, but assuming that we already agree on that and we have this captain at the European level saying this is where we're going to be leaders in AI, blockchain, nuclear fission by 2030, for instance. Like China is doing and the US is doing, by the way, very clear technological targets, and to be leaders. Why? Because there is no second best in this world. It's really important to understand. We don't get a second chance. There is no second best. Once the network effect kicks in, this is too late. This boat has sailed. And there is no second best. Why would you use another search engine than Google? Why? There is the best one. Why would you use the second best? So the big question, once you agree on that, is where do you invest in terms of regions? Because imagine that we agree at the EU level that we have these 3 technologies and we're going to put 10 billion in each. Okay, that's great. Now the big question is there are a lot of regions in Europe. Like, how do you make this choice? It's really important to actually have a system to identify where are the best locations. It's a little bit like if you decide to plant tomatoes, where are you going to plant tomatoes? In the north of Europe or in Italy? You have to think about whether these ecosystems are actually likely to receive this investment and transform them. Because I've worked on this issue for like 15 years, and there's a lot of money that is lost when people think that you can just decide, to build infrastructure at the periphery of a random city and declare that, as a tech center, incubator, whatever. That doesn't work. There are some ecosystems that are very likely to receive this investment and transform it and actually have something that works out. But you can also make a lot of mistakes. So we have to basically invest in the right location. Once we have the right technology, we have to invest in the right location. And again, it's something absolutely not trivial and random. It's much harder than one might think. The good news is that there are some tools that exist, mainly recommendation systems, that can be used and that are very underused for innovation policy and basically to guide massive public investment. So I'm sure you're familiar with these recommendation systems. They all work the same way, by the way. It's all like graph-based machine learning. And what they're really good at is filtering this massive amount of data. And you have like two types of this kind of recommender system. You have content-based learning and filtering and collaborative filtering. And you use them when you watch Netflix and there is a recommendation for the movie you might want to watch. Amazon, people that buy this product also buy this product. LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, Spotify. Spotify has 87 million songs, 87 million tracks. And just by magic, they know what you might want to watch before to listen to before you've listened to it. So like these AI techniques work really, really well for massive data, which we can use. When I was just saying we have 250,000 different technological categories and a million of researchers across the world, we need also this kind of tools. We need human intelligence. It's a bit like when you use Google Maps. You have a lot of Google Maps is super useful, but you cannot trust it like completely blindly. There are a lot of cars every year that goes through lakes because that's the route on Google Maps, and people don't realize that you should not go through a lake. So we need human intelligence, and we need these kind of tools to actually help achieve like better investment strategy. Now, what's very interesting is that similar graph-based machine learning algorithms are used actually behind that. The Netflix algorithm, Amazon algorithm, they work with the same principles, and we can also derive principles and heuristics to develop smart R&I investment. So that's kind of the good news. And it works like that. Happy to discuss how it works because actually really fascinating. But essentially, it's all about exploiting information in the structure of this network. So essentially, once you link, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 can be customers, A, B, C, D, can be movies on Netflix, and the information is not in the node itself, it's not in the customer that watched something, it's actually in the information of like this link, which is once we know what we watch and what others watch, we can triangulate and learn and basically predict the future very, very well and incredibly accurately. And that's going to be something very useful for R&I to basically select the right region for the right technology. So it's a matching problem at the end of the day. The way we do that, we actually link technologies between themselves. So you see here, for instance, here I only have 35 technologies. That's WIPO classification. But we can do that with 250,000 technologies. We know how related they are. So you see mRNA, for instance, somehow linked to measurements, somehow linked to analysis of biological materials. And basically, we have this information. This information is there, so we can use it to triangulate and evaluate what kind of regions, cities, neighborhoods, the level of analysis does not matter from a technical perspective, can receive this investment and has the highest potential. I mean, that's big. That's big. If you know basically where to invest, you're going to save a lot of resources. That, by the way, these maps I will show you, they will pop up in the SRIP report of the European Commission. It's a chapter which is like going to be published very, very soon. That is, for instance, this relatedness density around AI. So relatedness density, what does it mean? It means what are the regions that are the most likely to actually become world leader in AI. It does not necessarily mean they are yet. It does not necessarily mean they have a high count of patents, publication, anything like that. It's a little bit like you who was never watched Beauty and the Beast, but we know you like a lot of Disney movies, therefore we know that you're going to be very likely to like Beauty and the Beast. It's the same. It's like looking into the future. You can predict, in this case, and there is like a huge literature on that, like 200 articles published on that, which, by the way, managed to, I started my career where people were disagreeing. Now, the people who were disagreeing actually wrote paper together and completely agree on that. So we know how to do that pretty well. So you see, for instance, in this case, Paris, the Île-de-France region, is very, very strong in AI. If you wonder, it's basically Paris and the Munich area that have very, very strong related capabilities around AI. Now, things change if you look at other technologies, batteries. So for the SWIP report, we look at, I think, 8 different technologies, but you see that things change. So it's not like only one region is going to receive all funding. It depends on the technology. It's a matching problem. You don't plant tomatoes and apples in the same place, basically. This is blockchain. We talked a lot about blockchain. We talked quite a bit about blockchain. It's another technology. If I would have to pick 2 technologies that are going to completely change our life in the next 10 years, AI and blockchain. Why? AI automating predictions, and blockchain automating transactions. And the economy is a set of transactions. So basically, the use cases that you saw for AI, you can derive the same for blockchain. It has nothing to do with the price actions today. All of that is like complete noise. Same for NFT. The application today is basically gaming and collectibles. Who cares about that? It's just like, this is not serious yet. But the technology itself has absolutely incredible application, and we need to be leader there. Because the implications are so strong for life of citizens, we cannot just be regulating. We need to be like completely at the forefront. And if you want to be at the forefront, it has to be a map that looks like this. There is no national borders on this map. See, try to guess where France ends and where Italy starts and Germany. Well, that's the world of innovation. The world of innovation is not structured around nation. We structure this national intervention because we have programs that are the French level and the German level. But that creates a lot of not polarization, but a lot of lack of integration, and we cannot afford this lack of integration with breakthrough technologies. That's hydrogen, mRNA, if you're interested. You see, by the way, when we look at these health technologies, the local areas that are very strong, they shift a little bit more toward Italy and Spain. This is oncology. We have about 8. If you're interested, these are interactive maps, so you can look at them and see the exact figures for all EU regions. Now, I'm not going to go into this slide because I feel like I'm talking too much, but I can go back later. Something really important, that's another report, but this one is for DG Regio, and it's also integrating in science and technology, because that's something also very frustrating. Here, what you see in blue, for instance, these are scientific leaders that do not manage to become technological leaders. So we heard something very interesting earlier, which was this inability of some places in Europe to translate science, great science, into innovation and entrepreneurship. Something I suffered from when I was in France a long time ago, because I always had an entrepreneurial mindset, and I really blossomed in the US because of that. And in France, it was always like, I felt like, I don't know, I was very marginalized because of that, because of this very strong entrepreneurship will. And then when I arrived in the US, in Boston, especially when I was at MIT, basically what I realized, like all the professors there, they had one foot in academia, the other one in entrepreneurship. And that's a way to create bridges and links, absolutely fundamental. We had an incubator in the building, and it was like, students will come to us, do their research project, and then after say, all right, I feel like, do you feel like there is entrepreneurship potential? Do you feel there is a market? I would like to turn that into an idea. And then students, one after the other, they will start a company out of a research project. And this is, a culture that's very different as well. But here, this map tells you the gap between scientific excellence, that's blue, and yellow is like technological excellence, and basically green, you have both. Again, Paris is looking pretty good in this type of maps. But we can also, basically, we have a lot of data, and we can extrapolate and make better decisions by also integrating different type of data. Something extremely important, and I'm almost there, Jennifer. I don't know if I'm running out of time or not. I tend to speak too long, I know, but I'm almost there, and this is something I'm really excited about. It's really, really important. This is assessing the level of complementarity between EU regions. So this is some work I've done for the region Occitanie. That's where I'm from originally, the Toulouse area. That's why you see this part of the south of France, southwest of France, in a gray, because it's the complementarity of this specific region with every other region in Europe in terms of AI. So what we do, we scan at a very, very fine-grained level, if you want, the DNA of the region, and we look at whether it's complemented by the DNA of other regions, which means, let's say, let's think about languages and not technology. Let's say we both speak French, we're not complementary. Let's say I speak French, you speak Italian, maybe we have a form of complementarity. And for some technologies, so in this case AI, I do believe we have about 1,000 different small technological boxes that correspond to AI. Imagine I have 50 of them, and you have 50 of them. Our level of complementarity is basically 100%, because if we put us together, we have all the components of AI. Now, why is it important? Because we know how to evaluate that. We know how to evaluate, actually match regions in terms of like ideal level of complementarity, which is very important. And if in an ideal world, regions will naturally connect based on that. So if I will show you the next slide, where I'm going to show you connections between EU region, it should match that, essentially, right? An ideal world, we match perfectly. Well, I'm going to show you something very worrying, and that's also why I think we're here, and hopefully we're going to work toward avoiding that. And these are the connections between European regions. The top, in terms of innovation, the top 10 connections of Paris, they are all French regions. The top 10 connections of Paris, they're all French regions. If I do the same analysis for the US, and something we're doing also with colleagues from RTD, because when we found out about that, we said, like, we need to dig a bit deeper. We're going to be comparing China and the US and Europe. When you look at the US, the top connections for New York, Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles might be San Jose, the Silicon Valley. So you see, the connections, they are either based on size, sense, or actual complementarity. That's in a system where you connect based on these natural forces. And unfortunately, the top connections of German regions are also German regions. And that's something we had no idea was to this extreme. And that here is already telling you a lot of inefficiency of our system, because there is a lot of redundancy. Okay? So this is a really, really big issue. It's like, imagine if you never allow your soccer player to get out of your borders, well, you will never have a club that is as good as, I don't know, FC Barcelona, for instance. But if you start like this mobility and these links, that's how you get a club that can actually compete at a global scale. And that's what we're lacking here. And that's the crazy thing. For this AI Institute in Toulouse, I actually moved the team from MIT to Toulouse. It was a challenge, I can tell you. But now they're very happy, by the way, because of the quality of life, something we should not underestimate in terms of assets of Europe. And I moved this team, and I've completely forgotten why I was telling you that, but I will come back in a discussion. Last thing, attracting and retaining talent. I know you talked about that, but this is something, this graph, if you have never seen this graph, then I want to put numbers, because I know you know that Europe is not good at attracting foreign talent. You know that. That's an issue. Look on a complete extreme right. This is the United States. In light blue, these are the inventor immigrants. In green, underneath, it's actually the immigrants, so the one that get out of the US. Okay? Look at the ratio between the two. The US is the only country in the world that is this complete magnet for talent. And I've worked a lot in the US, and the most talented people I work with in the US, they were from India, from Canada, from Germany, from France. AI, we talk about AI. Yann LeCun, you know him, he's French, he works Facebook. And he went at Carnegie Mellon. Well, he's from Rennes. Now, that's a big issue when, it's okay if Rennes cannot retain Yann LeCun, but it's not okay if Paris, Munich cannot attract people like Yann LeCun. That we cannot win this race, again, if we don't have this absolutely incredibly ambitious strategy to attract and retain talent. Now look at China. China is bleeding their inventors. India, the same. But you could say maybe, GDP in China is not as high in the US, so it makes sense, no? This gap is completely GDP independent. Well, not at all. Canada, the UK, France. France is bleeding its inventors, and I can tell you here, I'm not making a difference between like the quality of inventors. If I factor in the quality, we are bleeding our best talent. Italy, Germany, Spain, Austria, they're all losing. It's all brain drain. Ireland, Japan, basically the only country where I start to see a little bit of something positive is Sweden, Finland, Belgium, and then Switzerland is a very specific case. But this is something that we absolutely have to take into account if we want to develop this EU leadership. Merci. Thank you. Looking forward to discussion.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That was a whistle-stop tour, a lot to take in those graphs. So, who has questions? Surely you must have some questions you want to ask based on either the presentation or ideas. Right, we've got one just here. Any other show of hands in the room that I can see? Okay. Yeah, another one back there.
So, thank you for the presentation. In principle, you talked about the artificial intelligence and the algorithm behind that have been used in different social networks. So my question is, don't you think that these social networks now are the source of invasion of your personal emotion?
Couple of words, are not a source of?
Are not a source of invasion of your personal emotion?
Of innovation of your personal emotions?
No, the source of invasion.
Invasion
of personal emotion.
Invasion of personal emotions. I do believe that it's a question that is not related to the talk, but let me address it because it's an interesting one, and on AI in general, and I love to talk about AI. There are a lot of issues with these algorithms, you know. Basically, most studies show that these algorithms are better at predicting your taste, what you're going to buy, what you're going to watch. Also, if you're at risk of suicide, so like we go very deep, than your best friends and partner. So definitely these algorithms, they can triangulate an amount of data and information that is absolutely staggering. And yes, therefore, they might know you better than your spouse. For some, in some element, in some dimension, absolutely true. So yes, that is true. I do agree. Now, whether it's an invasion or not is like depends how you use it. Depends how it's being used. So I'm not sure where we can go with this debate, but there are issues. You know, we all know the echo chamber, right? So these AI tools, of course, if they are being used to retain you on a website, on a social media, so basically to keep you scrolling, what I do is feed you information that you will like. So if you like Donald Trump, they will feed you more and more of Donald Trump stories because that's why you stay there. You know, if you get like a WIRE, news and you're into the Donald Trump sphere, you might not be interested, so you will like get out of the website. And that creates, of course, echo chamber because you get fed, your own bias can get replicated. So all of that is very true, but I do believe that it does not really apply to the use of AI. But
it's a really interesting topic and one we probably could talk about for hours, but maybe not today. I'm really interested in the question. I think obviously AI as a predictor is not the same as AI as a causation of problems, but although there are plenty of instances where it is. We have another question up here. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Maria Nyrus. I work for the Western Finland European office. Thank you a lot for this presentation. It was really, really interesting. From the local perspective, so you said the solutions and investments are local, there's the spikes. And you also said that we shouldn't regulate, we should more invest and be part of the competition. So my question is, where do we discuss this? Because the European Union is all about legislation and regulation. So where do you feel in Europe we can get to this, that we have this discussion where the local entities or authorities can then come up with this solutions for investments and competition?
To be a little bit positive, it's not all regulations. It's principles and positive culture and so on, and united goals and values. But
no, that is a great question. I just want to make like one comment. I did not say we should not regulate. I say, you know, in the balance, if you ask my opinion, we do too much on regulation and maybe not enough on like facilitating innovation. And sometimes, you know, letting see what happened. There's been a great paper on GDPR, like I think 4 or 5 days ago, econ paper, showing that basically it killed a lot of startups and small tech companies. And I know a lot of, and you probably know as well, a lot of entrepreneurs that suffer. If you're small and you have to comply with GDPR, you're gonna burn cash to in lawyer fees to actually make sure you're compliant. And then next to you, Google arrives with an army of the best lawyers in the world and figure out the solution and the loopholes and all of that. So in a way, this paper is showing that, you know, it destroyed a little bit of this low-level ecosystem. And there are good things and bad things in GDPR. Don't want to enter in the discussion, but just to put it in perspective, saying that we have to be careful and treat the bad part of the disease without, you know, making things worse. And that's not easy, but I think it would be justified to switch a little bit to the more innovative part. And we do have the capacity, we do have the talent, we do have that. Now, where is the right, who is the right audience and who has like power to do that? I do believe that that should be at the EU level, definitely. And I do believe that, you know, RNI, DG RNI should be also like a place to generate leadership and you know, because it's an investment, it's an allocation mechanism as well. I do believe that that's the right level to do that, but I also do believe that we don't have enough of this conversation, and that's something that we need to change. But, you know, events like this somehow, I would say, pushes us into the right direction. And can I ask you a question? What would be the right level for you?
Well, now working next to the local authorities, I would say they're overlooked. So the conversation is still from top to bottom instead of bottom up. And because they're short of funding, then they brand whatever innovation or research they're doing to accommodate where the money is, instead of getting money to really focus on what they're good at. That's my personal, not professional, of my office point of view.
No, thanks for sharing that, because I completely agree with that, and I'm pretty sure the entire room agrees with that. Definitely not enough investment power at the regional level and the local level and the EU level, but the in-between is a little bit too big, and that creates a lot of tension. I completely agree. By the way, when you work with regions, and you all do, week of regions, so you all do work with regions, I mean, this is like a really amazing level of innovation. They know the companies, they know the founders, and they really try to facilitate and help. Absolutely love working with regions. So it's really interesting unit to have this conversation. Completely agree.
One thing we all know about the EU is there's lots of high-level working groups. There's very few low-level working groups or medium-level working groups. Let's hear, we've got another question at the back. Any other hands in the air that I can see?
Thank you for that extremely rich presentation. If you had to pick just one of those slides which highlights a weakness in current policy settings, either a deficit or where the policy is absolutely wrong, which would that be?
The network one, the one with regions. You know, the one with regions. This one, and I probably could have done a better job at presenting this slide, to be honest. I just didn't have too much time, to be honest as well. But that would be better, because we're working on that with colleagues from DG RTD. And this, to be honest, is shocking. It's shocking when I see that, you know, when I say 10, it might be 12, 14 of the top links of Paris with other French regions. Does not make any sense. You pick the equivalent of Paris in the States or in China, and you get a completely different ecosystem. You have a lot of replication of efforts here. You have a lot of startups. You have a lot of projects happening in Europe that should never happen if they would be confronted to the real competitive landscape. That is bad. And again, it's not because of what the EU is doing. What the EU is doing is actually making this better. because the starting point, of course, is like countries. So we had all our innovation program, industrial program being done at the country level for historical reason. So what we're doing is exactly this, trying to widen and strengthen this European innovation area. So I'm not, by the way, it's not a critique of actions of the EU, and preliminary findings also show that this is getting better, but it's still, the gap is enormous, and that's a system failure.
Well, talking about what that represents in real terms, and I mean, I'm only seeing it for the first time today, I mean, it strikes me that there appear to be sort of almost language groups working here, because if you look, this grey is Switzerland, so France, Switzerland, maybe I see Netherlands and Germany working together. I mean, these seem to me to be representing not, if not pure language, but sort of working cultural backgrounds. Is that something you've drawn out of it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot countries themselves. Let's see if I can see from here. But there is a little bit of, there is geography. So obviously, you know, Austria, Germany being next to each other. The Alsace region, whoever knows the NUTS2 codes will see that the Alsace region is more likely to collaborate with, you know, border German regions. All of this is completely true, which is very interesting, by the way, because it's so marked in this system. It's so marked, and it's really, really inefficient. That is one of the major causes of the lag that you see between the US and Europe. Is like we have an innovation system that is not well integrated, not yet, and we have to break these barriers. But it's hard, you know. Sometimes when I work also with very large corporations, very large groups in France, in Paris, and I arrive in the board, it's like completely French speaking, and you know.
I'm also interested to know, when you're looking at regions for something like this, I don't see, obviously, not every country in the EU seems to be represented here, but what if you take smaller countries, like the two countries I know best, Malta and Ireland? I mean, do they operate as a national rather than regional?
This is just for visualization purpose. I think you have only 70 regions here, and not the 270, because I would have to clean up the graph. You will have beautiful graphs at some point. This is very fresh out of the oven. I will have to look at it. But Malta, just for classification reason, Malta is so small. It's actually the country of Malta is a NUTS2 region. So NUTS0, which is country level, NUTS1, which is big region, and NUTS2, smaller region, are the same in Malta. So they will show up as like one node here. So we'll have to go at the lower level. But I do believe that's something very common. But some countries are much better at integrating with Europe, all other European partners than others.
Any more questions? Yes, you have a follow-up here. Is it on these studies and on methodology, or are we going back to AI? We'll get you the microphone first.
So on your last slides, you saw the position of different countries when it comes to, So here, if you look at, for example, the United States and China, the two countries that European Union is considering its adversaries, they seem to be in completely different spectrum in terms of position. So for example, if you look in US, you have a lot of foreign minds. They are flowing there, so what's the reason for that? And why is it not the case in China, for instance?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. And by the way, I spend a lot of time in China. It's a fascinating ecosystem. Fascinating. I mean, when you look at, but the scale in China is something absolutely staggering. The Great Bay Area, which is Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, 120 million people. It's massive. So essentially, it might be an issue for a lot of countries to be like, it's an issue for France, it's an issue for Germany. China has such deep pockets of talent that is less of an issue. But you probably know why there is a big gap between China and the US here. And that's something, by the way, on the Chinese agenda, to revert that very explicitly to become attractive. So they came up, for instance, with this, it's just one of them, but a lot of them. They came up with this new program for top scientists. I do believe that they recruit about 500 top scientists in the world to create big labs. They create the top, they give you big resources, and then you create an entire lab of 50 people, but they recruit the top scientists. And for instance, they have this thing which is just a relocation fee of $1 million. So they match your salary wherever you are, and they just give you a relocation fee of $1 million. And what does it mean? It means that this is something that is strategically very important for China. This is something they identify as a gap, big gap. and they try to revert that. But of course, it's you know as well as me like what explains these differences. But this is definitely something they're trying to revert, and I do believe that we're not doing as much as we could to attract top scientists, top inventors in Europe. Like absolutely 100%. There are some initiatives. The one I know very well, for instance, the AI Institute where I work, is working not as a university, but like on the side, and therefore, for instance, does not have to comply with a salary grid and stuff like that. So the goal was, if they want to recruit someone from MIT, they say, okay, how much do you make? We match that first thing, because otherwise you cannot offer a 10 of the salary, just like doesn't make sense. So there are some very interesting initiatives in Europe, but we're not there yet. And I do believe that we have enormous potential, because what I can absolutely tell you, and it's not trivial, it seems not serious, but it's not trivial. The world does not know how good life is in Europe. The quality of life in Europe, the sustainability of cities in Europe is absolutely enormous. And when people travel to Europe, from the US, for instance, like I know my team from Boston, when they arrive in Europe, they say like, you know what? Like what my friend Cesar say is, I learned to work in the US, I learned to live in Europe. And that's super important. That's super important. I also did my PhD in economics, so we have the Toulouse School of Economics, with Jean Tirole, Nobel Prize 2014, attracting like 50% of the staff is from MIT, Harvard, top universities in the world, and they market life in Toulouse as like good quality of life, proximity to schools, all of that. We could do a much better job. The US has a marketing machine called Hollywood, and sell you a dream that you can be a waitress, like in France, and have a 150 square meter apartment in New York and have a great, life. And when you go to the US, it's not as true. We don't have this marketing machine. The world does not know yet, but this is an actual true resource that we have. And I feel very, like, looking forward, I feel very optimistic, but we have to develop this a little bit better.
Well, I think, okay, one last question, but let's keep it brief because I know people need to get to their breakout workshops.
Thank you. I guess you alluded to some of my, preempted some of my questions. Is that what does it give us in terms of quality of life? Because it's pretty much based on economics. I agree with you, looking at numbers, crushing numbers. But it doesn't, in the world where we're talking about décroissance, in the world where we're talking about permacrisis, the world where the notion of quality and sustainability is becoming now preeminent and quite pivotal to everything we do. Do we really want for the next generation live in a world where Google and Facebook are the models for success?
I'm going to build on that because you mentioned something we actually talked about at dinner last night, is that some of these areas that are producing the greatest innovation are also the most unequal societies or unequal cities of those top 5 that you mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a great question that could, we could expand on that a long, but I want to make some key points. You don't want to be ever in a situation of degrowth. You don't want to be ever in a situation where GDP goes down, where employment levels plummet. You don't want to see that. If you look at areas of France, part of the Northeast, if you look at the Rust Belt in the United States, if you look at what's happening when money is not there, when money dries out, it's no good. It implies your education, it implies your health, it implies your social services, it implies everything. An economy has to have this kind of inflow of cash. Production of these technologies give you that, give you good jobs, good pay, and make sure that you have roads that are like practical and stuff like that. So it's a condition, it's a necessity. There is, if I show you another graph, that was one of the main points that Hans Rosling, the Swedish statistician, was always showing. There is a correlation like that between GDP and every variable that you care about that you listed, all of them, from sustainability, CO2 in cities, consumption of meat, deaths of like childhood deaths, like everything that you care about is correlated with wealth overall. So it's a necessity. I completely agree that this is not enough. And we are lucky enough in some part of the world to actually, we have the luxury of having a different conversation and add on top of that. And there's a beautiful relationship between For instance, like being like environmentally conscious, it's a kind of S-curve. So first, you kind of, as a country gets rich, you eat more meat, you buy cars, you pollute. And then there is a moment where things pivot and you start to actually become, and we are in some part of the world, like in some European regions, we start to be in this part, which is beautiful because it means you have economic growth, you have wages, you have wealth, but also you have this great quality of life with other elements. But you don't want to go into a zone where you start losing jobs and not having money. And, whether we like it or not, these technologies, they're going to be used by our kids. Look at what, your kids have in their hand. Now, do you want these technologies to be built in Europe and, have European jobs and European values into that? Or you want to be regulating, TikTok, which is, Biden's, valued at 140 billion, by the way, the biggest unicorn in the world, and Facebook? Or do we want also other models and producing this model? So unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, we could keep going for another hour and a half, I think, and we're already attempting to regulate TikTok, so let's not go down that rabbit hole. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes for you to make your way to the breakout workshops. As a quick reminder, they are Workshop 1, Industrialization, Workshop 2, Strategic Autonomy, Workshop 3, Green Transition, and Workshop 4, Territorial Cohesion. And we will see you all back in here after the coffee break at the dot of 5 o'clock, because I know people need to catch trains. Please, a big round of applause for our fantastic Pierre-Alexandre and the speech.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for the really great questions.